My name's Glenn Sutherland, and welcome to my Sierra Railway 1923 HO Scale Railroad. I've been a fan and modeler and student of the Sierra Railway since I first moved to California in 1973. The Sierra Railway was built starting in 1897 in Oakdale, in California's Central Valley, where it connected to the Santa Fe and Southern Pacific. It built eastward across the flatlands and then up into the foothills of the High Sierra in Tuolumne and Calaveras counties. The initial impetus for the line was to tap into several large gold mining operations up in that area, but very soon the primary source of traffic was the lumber industry. At the upper end of the Sierra's line, both the West Side Lumber Company and the Pickering Lumber Company had huge lumber mill complexes, each fed by its own extensive logging railroad. Over the years, the Sierra also had a number of interesting branches, which made it a very interesting prototype to model. About 12 years ago, I had a Sierra-based railroad that was just about completed, but I decided to demolish most of it and start over for several reasons. First, I'd become more and more interested in the history of the Sierra, and I wanted my layout to be more prototypical and historically accurate. Second, I had gotten interested in operations, and I wanted the layout to be suited for walk-around control. And finally, I just wanted to make it larger so I could work in more prototypical scenes. So I demolished most of the layout and started building. My layout is in a 50 by 12 foot room on 3 decks. I use the Easy DCC system by CVB Products, which I'm very happy with. And I also chose a specific year to model. I first narrowed it down to the 1920s, which were a very busy time for the Sierra Railway. First, the general freight and passenger businesses were still very strong. Roads into Tuolumne County were still rather poor at that time. Secondly, they had started a lot of filming of Hollywood movies, and they were still running lots of excursion trains, which they'd done from the very beginning, so that added a lot of variety. And then the icing on the cake for me was that during the 20s, they were instrumental in the construction of 2 major dams. I further narrowed it down to the year 1923 because I had chosen eventually the Don Pedro Dam to model, and that was completed in 1923. And the other reason was that the Jamestown complex had recently been enlarged to handle the additional traffic, as well as the railroads enlarging both the locomotive and car fleets. To put it in a nutshell, my goal is to model the Sierra Railway as it existed in 1923 with as much prototypical accuracy as possible. That prototypical bent extends to the locomotives, to the structures, to the track arrangements, and to operations. I hope you enjoy the tour. The Sierra Railway's main line from Oakdale to Tuolumne was 57 miles long. On my layout, the main line is about 550 actual feet long, occupying the first deck and the third deck connected by a helix. With that much length, I was able to include 15 of the 26 stations shown on the Sierra's timetable for 1923. Let's follow a mainline freight from Tuolumne all the way down to Oakdale. Tuolumne is home to the West Side Lumber Company's huge lumber mill complex. I've modeled the mill, several lumber sheds, and a couple other buildings. That provides for challenging switching and hopefully gives the impression of a vast industrial complex. But Tuolumne also serves another purpose. From the beginning, I knew I wanted to model an extensive town area, and Tuolumne was the only place with enough room and depth to do that effectively. So I set aside a 3 by 6 foot area just for houses, stores, and other town structures. I kit bashed the West Side Lumber Company's office building. Most of the rest of these are kits, some with major modifications. One such enhancement was the fellow being thrown through the window of the Honky Tonk Saloon. Also, an invoice paid by the Sierra Railway in 1918 gave me the name of the Bald Eagle Meat Market. I had the good fortune of knowing Hank Johnston, the prominent railroad author. Hank made this tree and gave it to me for my 50th birthday. It grows in a position of honor near the depot. Speaking of which, the Tuolumne Depot is a signature structure which I scratch built from styrene. In order to do the curves in the roof, I used individual styrene shingles, roughly 10,000 of them. After climbing out of Tuolumne, the train arrives at Ralph Station, the highest point on the Sierra. Ralph is home to numerous apple orchards which ship their product out on the Sierra. Ralph also is where the Pickering's logging line from the woods joins the Sierra main line. A Pickering log train waits for our train to pass and then will follow us for the next 4 miles to the mill. Since 1919, the Sierra Railway has been heavily involved in the filming of movies and later TV shows. I like to add details and scenes with a basis in history. The train continues downhill as it crosses Black Oak Trestle. Our train arrives in Fasler, home of the Pickering's lumber mill. First, we pass by the Pickering Railroad's engine house. Here is the lumber mill itself. Because of its prominent eye-level location, I gave it a complete interior detail. Now our train is rolling through Sonora. While the Pickering sawmill is further up the line, the Pickering Lumber Company had its planing mill, door and sash factory, and other facilities here in Sonora. These buildings are all scratch-built, as is Hales & Simons. Still on my to-do list is the intricate Sonora Depot. We have arrived in Jamestown, the headquarters, heart, and soul of the Sierra throughout the steam era. Locomotive 30, which came over from the Angels branch this morning, is there to help with our switching. While that's happening, let's take a look around Jamestown. This is the depot, which I scratch-built just before the kit came out. The adjacent freight house was built and given to me by my good friend Dave Connery. This is the roundhouse, which the railroad expanded in 1922 to help handle a large increase in business. I scratch-built this roundhouse many years ago. These are the car sheds in Jamestown. The enclosed curved one was a recent scratch-built project with the assistance of Ray Davis and his cricket machine. And we can't forget about the Petticoat Junction water tank, which Billy Joe, Bobby Joe, and Betty Joe are using as a swimming pool. Except for the depot, all these buildings can still be seen as part of Railtown State Historic Park. Our switching in Jamestown finally done, we passed through Chinese Station. I scratch-built this depot from photos using styrene. Chinese is the last station on the third deck. Soon we enter a 4.5-turn helix down to the first deck. The helix is unscenic and off-stage, but I made it visible from the crew lounge so operators could monitor their train's progress. You probably can notice that there are actually 2 concentric helixes. The outside one is the 1.25-turn helix coming on the Angels branch, and we'll see that later. And the inside one, which is 4.5 turns, is on the main line. The train exits the helix and rolls through Rosasco, where the Don Pedro Dam branch joins the main line. An empty rock train from the branch rolls into the siding. After we're gone, he will run around his train and back down to Cooperstown for another load. He'll be here for a while, however. A scheduled passenger train will be coming up the hill fairly soon. We are stopping for water in Cooperstown at milepost 19. We've come down out of the hills and into the flatlands for the rest of our trip. Our train meets an uphill passenger train which left Oakdale about 40 minutes ago. The train rolls past Warnerville and its distinctive water tank, which was featured in the classic Western movie High Noon. This is Paul's cell, with the depot, section house, cattle pens, and very little else. Our trip done, we enter the Sierra's Oakdale yard, where our train will be broken down and cuts of cars delivered to the SP and Santa Fe staging yards, which you see in the far distance. From the very beginning, the railroad knew that they wanted to build a branch up to Angels Camp in Calaveras County to reach several large gold mining operations up there. It was about 10 miles away, but there were two major obstacles in between. The first was Table Mountain, an ancient lava flow with very hard rock and very steep sides. The other was the canyon of the Stanislaus River, which was about 800 feet deep and too wide to bridge across from rim to rim. After a couple false starts, they finally completed the branch in 1902 using very sharp corners, very steep grades, and 4 switchbacks. The branch ended up being 19 miles long to cover those 10 miles. I modeled the Angels branch on about 160 feet of track. It starts in Jamestown, which is on the 3rd deck, goes through a one-turn helix and ends up on the middle deck, of which it's the sole occupant. In 1923, there was one mixed train a day on the Angels branch. It would start in Angels Camp early in the morning, took about 2 hours to get over to Jamestown. It would then spend several hours in Jamestown switching and return late in the afternoon. Let's watch the return trip from Jamestown to Angels Camp. The regular Angels branch locomotive, number 30, is under the control of longtime engineer Gus Swanson. Because of the extra sharp curves, the railroad special ordered 2 very short passenger cars to serve on the Angels branch. One of them, Combine number 5, will serve as our caboose. The branch leaves in the direction of the stub end of the yard, so Loco 30 runs around the train, backs out, and departs on the Angels branch. After leaving Jamestown, the train goes through the branch helix and emerges in wide open territory. Getting over Table Mountain was made possible with a long, deep, curved cut through the volcanic rock. The work to make this cut was so difficult that it consumed the entire original budget for the entire branch. Our train's first work is at Marble Spur, where slabs from the Columbia Marble Quarry are loaded and taken to major construction projects throughout the West. This is a facing point spur with no runaround, so the empty flat was pushed from Jamestown. The train runs through Tunneltown just before beginning its descent into the river canyon. The major source of traffic here is a large gold mine just outside of town. After dropping the cattle car in Tunneltown, the train is now approaching the Stanislaus River Canyon and crossing a trestle. In its 19 miles, the Angels branch actually had 21 trestles. I've worked in as many as I can. We are now in the Stanislaus River Canyon and approaching switchback number 1. The steep canyon walls necessitated 2 switchbacks on each side of the river to keep the grades workable. Even so, the grades were so steep that the maximum train length through the river canyon was 3 cars plus a caboose. Because of that, the switchback tails were made only that long. Finally down to river level, the train crosses the Stanislaus River. Today, this scene normally is under several hundred feet of water. This bridge was my first scratch building project using styrene. The bridge is full scale, but the approach trestles are much compressed. Between switchbacks 3 and 4 is Coyote Creek Mine. I also modeled the underground workings of this mine. The maximum grade was 4.15%, so that's what I used here. These 3 parallel trestles are intended to show how steep the grades actually were. The red object in the brush is long underwear belonging to our engineer, Gus Swanson. The story goes that Gus hated to waste all the hot water in the steam engine, so he did his laundry while steaming through the countryside. On the way to Jamestown in the morning, he would hang it up in brush to dry, and then pick it up on the return trip. The story also goes that more than once Gus got knocked off his locomotive retrieving his laundry, but it wasn't a problem. The train was going slow enough he could jump up, run, catch up, and get back on and go on his way. Now we're approaching our destination. My Angel's yard is configured exactly like the prototype. The Wild and Woolly Angels branch was a popular place for excursion trains. This 1902 photo shows the first excursion train on the branch. Still popular in 1923, an excursion train is waiting to leave as we enter the Angels Camp yard. These excursion cars were a COVID-19 shelter-in-place project for me. After completing its run, engine number 30 pulls through the engine house and onto the turntable. The unique drive-through engine house and the side hill turntable both are prototypically correct. Once number 30 is turned and tied up, Gus will walk home and fold his laundry. Just another day on the Angels branch. A key feature on my layout, both visually and for operations, is the construction of the Don Pedro Dam. Upon its completion in 1923, this dam was the highest concrete gravity dam in the world, which meant that it consumed huge volumes of concrete. However, there was not a suitable source of gravel anywhere near the dam, so it had to be hauled in, and the Sierra Railway played a huge role in that. The quarry was at a place called Atlas along the Stanislaus River, just outside of Oakdale. The Sierra built a 3-mile branch to reach the quarry, and to get to the dam, the gravel would travel up that branch to the Sierra's main line, travel about 25 miles on the main line, most of it level, but about the last 5 miles up a steep grade on the main line, until it reached a place called Brasasco, where an 8-mile branch to the dam construction site was built. After pulling a string of empty rock cars from the Oakdale yard, the train backs down the Atlas branch. It will swap its empties for loads, which are on the loading tracks on both sides of the loader. This can be quite a switching puzzle. The Atlas loader was a very challenging scratch building project, especially because all I had to work from was these two prototype photos. My rock cars were built from the old Tyco operating hoppers from decades ago. I bought about 30 of them on eBay, many of them junkers, just to get the bodies and dumping mechanisms. But with new trucks and couplers, paint and decals, they are very similar to the 55-ton hoppers actually used on the project. Plus, they enable me to deliver live loads during operations to the construction site, which we'll see at the end of this run. Our locomotive has pulled a string of empty rock hoppers out the Sierra main line from Oakdale and is back down the Atlas branch. Today our train also includes 2 gondolas of pipe for the dam construction. You might also notice that we have a Santa Fe locomotive on this train. Because of the huge amount of traffic involved in the dam project, the Sierra leased locomotives from the Southern Pacific and, at least on my layout, the Santa Fe. The train of loads now is arriving in Cooperstown at milepost 19. Until here, the grades have been gentle and the prototype could haul 19 loaded cars. My trains have 8 cars to Cooperstown. Just beyond Cooperstown, the hills begin in earnest, and 3 loads, plus the caboose, was the maximum per locomotive. This called for multiple trips up the hill, deadheading, or both in reality and on my layout. Here a train arrives in Brasasco and begins to back up the branch. At Clavey Siding, the train leaves the caboose behind and backs 2 loads down toward the unloading trestle. This was a 5% downgrade, so empty cars were often added to the string for additional braking power. The unloading trestle was a massive structure built over gravel storage bins. A narrow gauge industrial railroad hauled the gravel out from the bins to the concrete mixing plant. This was another challenging scratch building project for me, working only from photos. Here we see another load of gravel being delivered. It falls into a hidden bin below and is recycled. The prototype delivered up to 40 rock loads per day for the better part of 3 years. During an operating session, we often get well over 20. Lots of other things had to be hauled to the dam site as well, especially boxcars of cement, but occasionally also a special load. This is a 28-ton rotor for the generator. It's being lowered down an incline on the face of the dam to reach the powerhouse. The same thing happens on my layout. This was another shelter-in-place project, working from the one photo you just saw. As we say goodbye to the Don Pedro Dam operation, the empties are headed back to the quarry for more gravel. When I decided to rebuild my layout about 12 years ago, I did so with considerable trepidation. But looking back now, with hindsight, I know it was a great decision. I've really enjoyed learning more about the history of the Sierra Railway, building that into my layout, and operating it with my friends. I hope you've enjoyed the tour. Thank you for watching.